Welcome to CSS Breakdown, book by book, Season 07, Episode 01, where we kick off our journey into Atkinson and Hilgard's Introduction to Psychology, 15th edition. What if everything you thought you knew about why people think, feel, and act the way they do is just the tip of a fascinating scientific iceberg? Today, we're embarking on a deep dive into Atkinson and Hilgard's Introduction to Psychology, 15th edition. This is a really foundational text. It's been guiding students through the complexities of the human mind for decades now.
Oh, absolutely. It really is a landmark book. For
Yeah.
50 years, it's been, a leading psychology textbook. And it's celebrated for being so accessible, very student-centered in its approach.
Right.
What sets it apart, I think, is its knack for perfectly blending the latest, really cutting-edge research with a thorough understanding of those classic landmark studies that built the field.
Mhm.
And this edition, essentially includes new European authors, too, making it truly transatlantic, internationally diverse. And it always connects these big psychological concepts back to our everyday lives.
Yeah, that's key. So our mission for this deep dive is essentially to unpack the fundamentals, the concepts, the history, the contemporary approaches, and of course the research methods. All the things that define this scientific study of, well, why we think, feel, and act the way we do. It's really about giving you that shortcut to being genuinely well-informed about yourself and, other people. So let's just jump right in. When we talk about psychology, what is it really, beyond maybe some common assumptions?
Well, at its core, psychology is the scientific study of behavior and mental processes.
Okay, scientific being the key word there.
Absolutely, that scientific aspect is crucial. And because it is scientific, it lets psychology explore this just astonishingly diverse range of topics, often uncovering things that are, frankly, quite counterintuitive.
Like what? Give us an example.
Okay, well, take brain damage. Did you know that damage to a very specific part of the right side of the brain can actually stop someone from recognizing familiar faces?
Just faces.
Just faces. It's a condition called prosopagnosia. Other cognitive functions can remain completely normal. Oliver Sacks, the neurologist, he famously wrote about a man who literally mistook his wife for a hat because of this.
Wow.
And there's another story, a patient complaining someone was staring at him in a mirror. Turned out it was his own reflection he couldn't recognize.
That's incredible. It really shows how specialized parts of the brain are.
Exactly. It highlights how localized some functions can be.
So that's the brain side. What else does psychology reveal about, say, how we perceive people?
Well, there's a fascinating distinction there in how we see others versus how we see ourselves. There's something called the fundamental attribution error.
Okay.
So if you see someone doing something good, like, say, a woman donating to charity, you probably immediately think, oh, she's a generous person.
Right.
You attribute it to her personality.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
You tend to overestimate her personality traits and underestimate any situational factors. Maybe she was pressured into it,
Okay, I see. So we jump to conclusions about character.
pretty much. But then for our own actions, we often flip it.
How so?
The book actually opens with this anecdote about giving kids pizza rewards for reading. This ties into something called the overjustification effect. While rewards might boost a behavior at first, they can actually, backfire. People start to discount their internal reasons for doing something because the external reward is so obvious.
Wait, so giving my kid pizza for reading might actually make them, reading less in the long run?
It's a real possibility. It suggests that those external rewards can sort of shift your perception of why you're doing it. From, I enjoy this, to, I'm doing this for the pizza.
Wow. So these two effects, the attribution error and overjustification?
Exactly. They highlight this crucial psychological thing. We're often, let's say, quicker and maybe simpler when judging others, but we give ourselves more nuance, more credit for the situation when explaining our own behavior. It's a kind of built-in bias.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
What else?
Well, consider childhood amnesia. This is something most people experience. You probably can't recall events from your first 3 years of life, right?
Yeah, pretty much nothing before maybe 3 or 4.
Exactly. Even significant things like maybe a sibling being born during that time. It's quite striking considering how much happens in those early years, yet very few conscious memories stick.
Why is that? Does psychology explain it?
There are theories, often linked to brain development or language acquisition, which we might touch on later. But the phenomenon itself is just, it's a universally recognized psychological fact.
Okay. What about bigger societal issues?
Oh, definitely. Psychology delves into complex things like obesity, It looks at factors leading to overeating, not just willpower, but maybe a history of deprivation. There was research on rats, for instance. Rats deprived of food early on, they ate significantly more later when food was freely available. It suggests past experiences can really set up current behaviors.
So it's not just about self-control in the moment.
Not entirely, no. It's more complex. And then there's the whole debate about media violence and kids' aggression. That's been going on for ages.
Right. The idea that maybe watching violent stuff gets it out of your system. Catharsis.
Yeah, the cathartic effect view. But the research, it consistently points the other way.
So watching violence makes kids more aggressive.
The evidence strongly suggests so. One classic experiment had kids watch violent cartoons versus nonviolent ones. The group that watched the violent ones showed measurably more aggression afterward, and these effects can last. Studies have found correlations. Boys watching more violent TV at age 9 were rated as more aggressive even at age 19.
Wow. Okay, so these examples, brain damage, judging others, memory, eating, media effects, they really show psychology isn't just about therapy sessions.
Not at all.
It touches almost everything, our perceptions, our habits, even public policy, like you mentioned with lie detectors.
Exactly. Lie detector tests aren't admissible in U.S. courts, largely because psychological research demonstrated their inaccuracy. They're just not reliable enough.
So understanding these psychological facts, the scientific evidence, it's actually crucial for just navigating the world and evaluating all the claims we hear every day.
Absolutely essential.
And that scientific evidence is key today. But as you said, psychology wasn't always a science in the way we think of it now. Let's dig into that history a bit. Where did it all begin?
Right, the historical journey is really interesting. Its roots go way back, actually, to ancient Greece.
Philosophy, I assume.
Definitely philosophy. Thinkers like Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, they were asking fundamental questions about mental life. What's consciousness? Are people rational? Do we have free will? Questions we still wrestle with, frankly.
And the biological side.
That too. Hippocrates, the father of medicine, he made really important observations about how the brain controls body organs. That laid some crucial groundwork. And one of the oldest debates, which is still relevant, emerged from that era, the nature-nurture debate.
Ah, yes, born that way or made that way.
Kind of. The nature view, thinkers like Descartes were associated with this, argued we're born with certain innate ideas like God, self, perfection. Descartes even saw the body as a sort of machine you could study.
Interesting. And the nurture side?
That's more associated with John Locke and his idea of tabula rasa, the mind, as a blank slate at birth. All knowledge comes from experience, from the senses.
So which is it?
Well, today, psychologists see it as much more nuanced. It's not really nature or nurture anymore. The real question is how nature and nurture interact and combine to shape who we are.
Okay, so philosophy sets the stage. When did it become a science?
The big moment is usually pegged at 1879. That's when Wilhelm Wundt established the first formal psychological laboratory in Leipzig, Germany.
Wundt. Okay.
His core belief was revolutionary at the time, that mind and behavior could be scientifically analyzed. He studied things like senses, attention, emotion, memory.
How did he study them?
Mostly using introspection, which basically means observing and recording your own perceptions, thoughts, and feelings.
Sounds a bit subjective.
It turned out to be very subjective. People reported different things. It was hard to verify, hard to reach solid conclusions. So while it was a crucial first step, introspection as a primary method didn't really last. It led to the need for more objective approaches.
Which led to the different schools of thought in the early 20th century.
Exactly. It was a period of intense development and debate. You had several major perspectives emerge.
Aye.
Well, first there was structuralism, led by E.B. Titchener, who was actually one of Wundt's students. They wanted to analyze the basic elements of consciousness.
Yeah.
Like, what are the fundamental structures of the mind?
So breaking experience down.
Precisely. Like trying to break down the taste of lemonade into just pure sensations. Sweet, bitter, cold, finding the mental building blocks.
Okay. And what came next?
Then you had functionalism, strongly associated with William James. This was almost the opposite approach. Functionalists weren't so interested in the structure of the mind, but in its function. How does the mind work? How does it help us adapt to our environment? James was heavily influenced by Darwin and evolution.
So more about the purpose of mental processes.
Exactly. And they emphasized observing actual behavior, not just introspection, to understand that purpose.
That sounds more practical. But then things took a sharper turn, didn't they? With behaviorism.
Oh, a very sharp turn. Behaviorism, founded by John B. Watson, was a powerful reaction against focusing on consciousness at all.
Because you can't see consciousness.
Right. Watson argued psychology should only study observable behavior, things you can see and measure directly. He believed almost all behavior was learned through conditioning and reinforcement.
Like the example of giving cookies for whining.
Exactly. The environment shapes behavior. Pavlov's work on conditioning, like dogs salivating to a bell, was also hugely influential here. Behaviorism dominated American psychology for quite a while.
But not everywhere, right? What about Gestalt psychology?
Right, simultaneously in Germany, Gestalt psychology emerged. Gestalt is German for form or configuration.
And their main idea?
Their famous phrase sums it up. The whole is different from the sum of its parts.
Meaning?
Meaning, our perception isn't just about adding up sensory bits. We perceive patterns, organizations, wholes. When you see three angles forming a triangle, you perceive the triangle, not just three separate angles. They focused on how we organize perception.
And that influenced later thinking.
Massively. Especially cognitive and social psychology. People like Kurt Lewin, Solomon Asch, major figures influenced by Gestalt ideas.
Okay, so structuralism, functionalism, behaviorism, Gestalt. What about Freud? Where does psychoanalysis fit in?
Psychoanalysis. This was Sigmund Freud's creation, both a theory of personality and a method of psychotherapy. Its core concept was the unconscious.
The hidden part of the mind.
Exactly. Thoughts, impulses, wishes, emotions that we're unaware of, but that Freud believed powerfully influence our behavior.
How did you think that worked?
He argued that unacceptable childhood wishes, often related to innate drives like sex and aggression, get pushed into the unconscious. But they don't just disappear. They express themselves indirectly through dreams, slips of the tongue, neurotic symptoms.
And he used things like dream analysis.
Yes, free association and dream analysis were his key methods to try and access this unconscious material. It was pretty controversial then, especially the focus on sex and aggression.
Still kind of is sometimes.
True, but the core idea that mental processes can operate outside of conscious awareness is actually widely accepted in psychology today, even if Freud's specific theories are debated.
So a lot of competing ideas early on. How did psychology move towards its modern form? What were the big shifts after these initial schools?
Well, the period after World War II saw some major developments that really shaped contemporary psychology. One huge influence was the invention of computers in the 1950s.
Computers, how did they influence psychology?
They provided a powerful new metaphor, and even a tool for thinking about the mind. Psychologists started developing information processing models.
Treating the mind like a computer.
In a way, yes. Thinking about humans as information processors. How we take in information, store it, retrieve it. Memory, for example, could be conceptualized like RAM and a hard drive. It offered a more dynamic way to think about mental processes than behaviorism allowed.
That makes sense. What else?
Modern linguistics played a big role. Noam Chomsky's work, particularly his book Syntactic Structures in 1957, really kicked off psycholinguistics. It forced psychologists to think about the complex mental structures needed for language.
So a move back towards studying the mind itself.
Definitely.
All right.
And alongside this, neuropsychology was making huge strides. Advances in biomedical technology allowed researchers to link specific brain regions and activities to thoughts and behaviors much more clearly.
Like Roger Sperry's work.
Exactly. His Nobel Prize in 1981 recognized that work showing clear links between brain areas and mental functions. All these developments, computers, linguistics, neuroscience, led to what we call the cognitive revolution.
The cognitive revolution.
Yeah. Psychology came full circle, in a sense. It returned to studying mental processes, but this time armed with much more sophisticated theories, models, and, importantly, research tools. This cognitive orientation is now central to many areas of psychology.
So bringing all that history together, how do psychologists actually approach questions today? It sounds like they don't just pick one school of thought anymore.
No, definitely not. Contemporary psychology is much more integrated. Psychologists typically draw on multiple perspectives, different lenses, as you put it, to understand behavior and mental processes fully. There are 5 major ones that are widely recognized.
Okay, what are that?
Let's maybe use an example to illustrate. Say, someone punches another person after being insulted. How would each perspective look at that?
Okay, good idea.
First, the biological perspective. This focuses on the underlying neurobiology, what's happening in the brain. Which areas are active? What about neurotransmitters, hormones, nerve firing? It connects the action directly to physical events in the body.
Right, like we discussed with prosopagnosia or maybe neurotransmitters in depression.
Exactly. Second, the behavioral perspective.
Hmm?
This looks at observable stimuli and responses. The punch is seen as a learned response to the stimulus, the insult, possibly reinforced by past experiences where aggression worked.
Uh, Shaped by rewards and punishments in the environment.
Pretty much. Third, the cognitive perspective.
Yeah.
This focuses on the mental processes behind the action. How did the person perceive and interpret the insult? What were their thoughts, beliefs, expectations? Maybe they interpreted it as a major threat to their self-esteem, and punching was a calculated, if poor, response.
So it's about the thinking, the interpretation.
Yes. Fourth, the psychoanalytic perspective. Stemming from Freud, this looks for unconscious motives. The aggression might stem from a deep-seated, maybe unconscious fear or desire, perhaps related to early childhood experiences or unresolved conflicts, maybe displaced anger.
The hidden drivers.
Right. And fifth, the subjectivist perspective. This emphasizes the individual's subjective experience and interpretation of the world. How did that specific person, given their unique cultural background, personal history, and current state, define that situation?
So it's about their personal reality.
Exactly. It acknowledges that we actively construct our view of reality. It also explains things like naive realism, our tendency to think our subjective take on things is objective reality. Like those studies showing people overestimate the size of valuable coins, our desires color our perception.
Wow. So using all 5 lenses gives a much richer picture than just one.
Absolutely. They're often complementary. And it's important to understand the relationship between the biological and the psychological perspectives.
How do they relate? Is one more fundamental?
Well, there's a concept called reductionism, which is the idea of explaining psychological phenomena purely in biological terms, like explaining memory just by neurons firing.
But you're saying it's not that simple.
Right. Because psychological findings often guide biological research. Psychologists identify phenomena, like the fundamental attribution error, and then neuroscientists might look for the brain mechanisms. Plus, biology always operates within a context of past experiences and the current environment.
Like the obesity example, genetics, habits, culture all play a role.
Precisely. So, modern psychology really tries to understand things at both the psychological and biological levels, recognizing they constantly interact.
That makes sense. And beyond these perspectives, the field itself is huge, right? With lots of different specializations.
Yeah, incredibly broad. You have psychologists specializing in biological psychology, cognitive psychology, developmental psychology, studying change across the lifespan, social and personality psychology, looking at social influence, group behavior, individual differences.
And the more applied areas.
Yes, like clinical and counseling psychology, dealing with psychological disorders and adjustment problems. School and educational psychology, focused on learning and school environments. And even organizational and engineering psychology, applying principles to workplaces and human-machine interaction.
It covers so much ground. But you also mentioned it's constantly evolving. Are there some cutting-edge areas really pushing the boundaries now?
Definitely. The book highlights 4 key areas really shaping the future. First is cognitive neuroscience.
We touched on that linking mind and brain.
Exactly. But using increasingly sophisticated tools like fMRI and PD scans to see how mental activities are actually carried out in the brain. Showing, for instance, different brain regions lighting up for short-term versus long-term memory tasks. It's even expanding into emotions, affective neuroscience, and social behavior, social neuroscience.
Very cool. What's second?
Evolutionary psychology. This perspective tries to understand the biological origins of our psychological mechanisms by looking at how they might have evolved through natural selection.
Like maybe why we prefer sweet foods.
Exactly. Liking sweets might be adaptive because it pointed our ancestors towards high-energy fruits. Or overeating after deprivation could be an evolved mechanism to survive famine. It looks for the deep evolutionary roots of our behaviors and preferences.
Interesting.
Third, cultural psychology. This field examines how our culture shapes our mental representations and processes. It highlights fascinating differences, for example, between generally more individualistic Western cultures and more collectivist Eastern cultures.
How does that play out?
It can affect how we explain behavior. The fundamental attribution error might be stronger in the West. It can influence study habits, even how we perceive basic visual scenes. It really underscores that psychology isn't always universal. Culture matters deeply.
A really important corrective. And the fourth area?
Positive psychology. This emerged relatively recently to try and balance psychology's traditional focus on problems and mental illness.
So focusing on what makes life worth living.
Precisely. It scientifically studies positive experiences like happiness, flow, optimism. Positive personality traits like courage, wisdom, resilience. and positive institutions that foster well-being. The broaden and build theory, for example, suggests positive emotions actually help us build psychological resources.
That sounds like a very welcome addition. Okay, so we have these perspectives, these subfields, these cutting-edge areas, but how do psychologists actually do the research? How do they discover these things?
Right, the how. It boils down to a systematic process. Generally, it starts with generating a hypothesis.
A testable prediction.
Exactly. A testable statement, often derived from observations, past research, or a broader scientific theory. Like a theory about genetics and sexual orientation might lead to the hypothesis that identical twins are more likely to share the same orientation than fraternal twins.
And once you have the hypothesis,
You test it using scientific methods designed to be unbiased and reliable, meaning others could repeat your study and ideally get similar results.
and the gold standard for testing, especially for cause and effect, is the experiment, right?
Absolutely. The experiment is the most powerful method for determining causality. You manipulate one thing, the independent variable, the thing you think is the cause.
Like the amount of money offered for math problems.
Perfect example.
Yeah.
And then you measure the outcome, the dependent variable, the thing you think is the effect.
The performance on the math problems.
Right. You need at least two groups, an experimental group that gets the treatment, the money, and a control group that doesn't, which serves as a baseline.
And the crucial part is how people get into those groups.
Critically important, random assignment. Every participant has an equal chance of being in either group. This is what makes experiments so powerful. It minimizes the chance that pre-existing differences between the groups, like math ability, motivation, are responsible for the results, allowing you to infer cause and effect.
Makes sense. Then you measure and use statistics.
Yes. You assign numbers to your variables, measure the dependent variable, and use statistics like comparing the average mean performance of the groups to see if there's a real difference. You look for statistical significance, meaning the observed difference is unlikely to be just a fluke of chance.
Okay. But you said earlier sometimes you can't do an experiment. What then?
That's where the correlational method comes in. You use this when you can't manipulate variables, maybe for ethical or practical reasons, like comparing taste sensitivity in people with anorexia versus those without. You can't assign people to have anorexia.
So you just measure things as they are.
Exactly. You measure two or more variables and see if they are related, if they tend to go together. We calculate a correlation coefficient, usually called R.
And that tells you the strength and direction of the relationship.
Precisely. It ranges from -1.00 plus 1.00. A positive correlation means as one variable goes up, the other tends to go up, like study time and grades. A negative correlation means as one goes up, the other tends to go down, like class absences and grades. 0 means no relationship.
But you have to be careful here.
Extremely careful. This is maybe the single most important takeaway about research methods for most people. Correlation does not imply causation.
Say again?
Correlation does not imply causation. Just because two things are related doesn't mean one causes the other.
Like the TV violence and aggression example.
Perfect. Does watching violent TV cause aggression? Or do aggressive kids choose to watch violent TV? Or is there a third factor, like parenting style or neighborhood environment, influencing both? Correlation alone can't tell you. You need experiments for causation.
A vital distinction. So, besides experiments and correlations, how else do psychologists gather data?
There are several other useful methods, often used in earlier stages of research or when experiments aren't feasible. Direct observation is one, just observing behavior as it naturally occurs.
Like Jane Goodall with the chimpanzees.
Exactly, or observing children on a playground or babies' reactions. The key is having trained, objective observers.
What about asking people directly?
That's the survey method, using questionnaires or interviews. Alfred Kinsey's famous studies on sexual behavior used extensive interviews. It's great for gathering data from large groups.
Any downsides?
A big one is the social desirability effect. People might not answer honestly, wanting to present themselves in a good light.
Makes sense. What else?
There are case histories, which are in-depth studies of a single individual, often looking back at their life. They can provide rich details and suggest hypotheses, especially for rare conditions, but they rely on memory, which can be flawed, and you can't easily generalize from one person.
So good for ideas, less for proof.
Right. And finally, researchers rely heavily on literature reviews, summarizing existing research on a topic. These can be traditional narrative reviews or increasingly meta-analyses.
Meta-analysis, what's that?
It's a statistical technique for combining the results from many different studies on the same question. It treats each study like a participant, in a way, to get a more powerful and objective estimate of the overall effect. It's a very systematic way to synthesize evidence.
Okay, quite a toolkit psychologists have. But given they study people, and sometimes animals, ethics must be a huge consideration.
Absolutely paramount. Because we're dealing with living beings, often exploring sensitive topics, ethical guidelines are incredibly strict and important.
What are the core principles for human research?
First is minimal risk. The risks participants face in a study should ideally be no greater than those they encounter in everyday life. Psychological stress is a key concern here.
And people have to agree to participate.
Yes, that's informed consent. Participants need to be told enough about the study to make an informed decision about participating. They must volunteer freely and know they can withdraw at any time without penalty.
What if the study requires deception, like not telling them the true purpose?
That's a tricky area. Deception is only allowed if it's absolutely necessary and justified by the study's value, and if the risk is minimal. And crucially, if deception is used, debriefing afterward is mandatory.
Explaining everything afterward.
Everything. Explaining the true purpose, why deception was necessary, answering questions, and addressing any distress the study might have caused. The goal is for participants to leave feeling respected and ideally having learned something.
And privacy.
The right to privacy is vital. Information about participants must be kept confidential. Usually, this means separating names from data or only reporting group averages.
And someone weighs the risks and benefits.
Yes, there's always a cost versus benefit analysis. Researchers, and importantly, institutional review boards, IRBs, have to weigh the potential risks or costs to participants against the potential benefits of the knowledge gained.
What about research with animals?
That also has strict ethical guidelines. About 7% of psychological studies use animals, mostly rodents and birds.
Why use animals?
Two main reasons. Sometimes animal behavior itself is the focus. Other times, animals serve as models to understand processes relevant to humans, like learning, stress, addiction, because we can conduct research that wouldn't be ethical with people.
But there are rules.
Absolutely. Painful or harmful procedures are only permissible if the potential knowledge gain is significant and alternatives aren't available. Researchers have a strong moral obligation to treat animals humanely and minimize any suffering.
It really sounds like the guiding principle is respect for the participants, human or animal.
That's the core idea. They should be treated as partners in the research enterprise.
Well, we've certainly covered a lot of ground today in this deep dive into Atkinson and Hilgard's introduction to psychology. We've unpacked what psychology is, that scientific study of behavior and mental processes. We've traced its fascinating history from philosophy through the early schools to its modern form. We explored the diverse contemporary perspectives, biological, behavioral, cognitive, psychoanalytic, subjectivist that psychologists use today. We looked at the methods from experiments to correlations to observation, and crucially, the ethical compass that guides all this work. It really feels like a shortcut to being well informed about these foundations.
It really does. And what stands out is how dynamic psychology is. It's not static. It's constantly evolving, integrating new findings, new perspectives, new technologies. Like that iceberg you mentioned at the start, there's always so much more beneath the surface to explore.
Absolutely. And that brings us to a final thought for you, the listener. As you've heard, psychology is constantly integrating new ideas and expanding its reach, thinking about cognitive neuroscience, evolutionary psychology, cultural psychology, positive psychology. What other new advances might be on the horizon in 21st century psychology? What could further integrate these different perspectives or maybe fill some current gaps in our understanding of this incredibly complex thing we call the human mind? Something to think about. We encourage you to keep exploring, keep questioning.